Good morning and welcome to this week's Reset for Life moment. It's been a sad and disheartening 7 days since we last spoke. The response to George Floyd's murder has exploded in protests, riots, lootings, shootings, more deaths, arrests, threats, anger, hurt, and all-around chaos. When you add to this the ongoing saga of the COVID-19 virus, there is much to be worried and anxious and upset about nowadays. You know, the truth is, there's not much that we can do about COVID-19. It's here whether we want it or not. We just have to take personal steps to stay safe and in the midst of it. However, there's a lot that we can do about the anger and the racism in our hearts. And we can do this because though our skin color isn't a choice, unless of course you're like me and you stay out in the sun too long, the anger and the racism in our hearts is a choice. As always, we need to turn to the Bible for the answers. In Matthew 22, verses 34 to 40, one of the experts of the religious law tried to trap Jesus and asked him what he thought the greatest commandment was. Jesus responded by saying these words, "You must love the Lord your God with all of your heart and soul and mind and strength. This is the first and the greatest commandment." He went on to say the second is equally important. I want you to capture that. It's equally important. He said, "Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these," Jesus said. Love your neighbor as yourself. If there was ever a time that we needed to heed this timeless advice, it's now. Sure, there'll always be people who say, well, hey, listen, I don't have a black neighbor, so I don't have to love them. Well, unfortunately for you, the Bible has an answer for that also. You see, when you combine the story that I just told you about in Matthew, and you combine it with a similar account in Luke chapter 10, you find that the religious leader then said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" He was looking for a loophole. He was looking for a way to only love a specific set of people. Jesus responded by telling him and the crowd a story that we commonly refer to as the Good Samaritan. It's about a Jew who was walking along the road one day and he was beaten up and mugged by some thieves. They stripped him of his clothes and they left him for half dead. And as he was laying there, both a priest and a temple assistant walked right by him at separate times, and neither of them bothered to help him. Both of these so-called religious leaders suffered from a deadly disease that I call, "It's not my issue." They refused to get involved because it didn't directly affect them. They also refused to confront the hatred in their hearts for a fellow man who was in need. They left him there naked and bleeding. Soon a Samaritan came along and saw the wounded man. He had compassion upon him. He took care of his wounds, and he took him to an inn where he paid the innkeeper to take care of this wounded man until he got back. Now, what you need to understand was how much the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. The Jews thought that the Samaritans were half-breeds, and the Samaritans thought that the Jews were snobs. And knowing this, Jesus asks the crowd who is listening to his story, he says, "Who do you think was a neighbor to this man?" The crowd responded, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said, "You're right, yes. Now go and do the same." Friends, can I tell you that your neighbor isn't your actual neighbor? Your neighbor is everyone, especially those that are in need. We are all together on this spinning rock, and we all need to learn to take care of each other. As Christians, there's no excuse for any kind of hatred or animosity towards another person. You know, Jesus gives us the perfect example when he was here on the earth because he consistently increased the profile of those who were marginalized by society. In his culture and in his day, women and children and tax collectors and prostitutes were all looked down on in a very male-dominated, highly religious culture. Yet Jesus took the time to speak and listen to these marginalized groups and let them know his love for them. He didn't turn his back on them because they were different. Instead, he leaned in and he engaged them and he loved them. Jesus taught us that no matter the differences, everybody is our neighbor and everybody deserves our attention and our care. Here's one reason why I think we need to accept this as a truth. You know, someday you are going to be in need. And you'll be very thankful that the person who helps you, even though their skin tone might be different than yours, will see you as their neighbor and they will extend love to you. So my challenge to you is this: extend that same courtesy to others. You know, life can be cruel. Let's not make it crueler by hurting others unnecessarily. Christians need to lead the way in this. They need to make the world take notice of their love for each other, regardless of our differences. This is the time for the church to take the lead, for the church to make a difference, for the church to love like they have never loved before. I say this to people of every color. Now is the time to love. Now is the time to exhibit Christian character regardless of what you're feeling. This is the only way to stop the hatred that we're experiencing. We can't afford to be silent on these matters. We must stand up for any person who is being abused, marginalized, and mistreated. And the systematic abuse of the black community is an injustice that we who are more privileged must stand up against. We must lend our voice to the call for justice and equality, love and unity. When there's an injustice, I believe it's the Christian's responsibility to respond in a biblical manner. The biblical manner is to uphold the sanctity of all life and the value of all people, regardless of how different they are from us. We must do this, friends. We can do this. We will do this. I will not personally be a part of a culture that tells someone they don't matter. I will do my part. I will stand up for what is right and what is biblical. The question is, will you? That's my Reset for Life word for today. Have a great week.